Hello and welcome to Exchanges for another week. Consumer behaviour. It's a topic you guys have been asking about a lot, so who better to get in but a consumer behavioural expert in Amanda Stevens. Amanda needs no introduction in this space. She is the preeminent go-to expert in consumer experience, consumer behaviour, and the consumer futurism that is. Before we get to Amanda's exchange that I've had with her, don't forget we are now sponsored here at Exchanges by More, a lifestyle by design app for everyday Australians to build their wealth through property and shares. That's more, moorr.com.au. But now, here's Amanda with this week's Exchanges. Amanda Stevens, welcome to Exchanges. It's about time I got somebody to come on and talk about the consumer, but considering that we're a consuming nation. What at the moment is catching your attention, because this is your expertise, the big trend that at the moment, not just Australians, but the world is doing in that consumer space?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Evan. There's obviously lots that we can talk about in this sphere because human behavior, consumer behavior is just changing so rapidly. And obviously, lots of things are accelerating that. We've got economic factors, as you know, in play. We've also got technology acceleration. Digital acceleration is probably the number one thing that is really shifting consumer expectations, consumer behavior, consumer motivations, and priorities. So, I think that the digital acceleration is the big one, and that from a consumer brand perspective is raising lots of challenges for brands simply to get the attention of today's consumer.
That word attention, right? I want to pick up on that because we now live in a world of pace and we live in a world of digital. The digital world now, realistically is boiled down to 90 seconds, or if you're in TikTok world, it's 30 seconds. How do you catch the ever shortening attention span of that consumer?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? And I think that the recent federal election we have just had, I think, served up lots of lessons for anyone in marketing or anyone in who has ever had to put a sales campaign or a message together to market either themselves or a brand. And that is that, lots of lessons. But I think, yes, we're in the attention economy, but I think what we're seeing is that attention is not enough. So I think that there's this really interesting perfect storm happening around grabbing attention of consumers, but also building trust very quickly and also giving something to them. I think that we all got the spammy text messages during the election, and I think the big lesson for me in that, and I just recently wrote about it, was just because you have access to someone's inbox doesn't mean that you should be in there. Um,
Can I pick you up on that then? Because I think that's fascinating, that link. So we know, I'll put the Labor Party win to one side. I'll come back to you on that one because
yeah,
clearly
sure.
they've done something very, very well. What did the Liberals and the Greens party do wrong? Because that's clearly the other part of that question, is that the Greens have the attention but didn't get the vote. The Libs had the brand stink, I think is the correct term, and also had lost the attention. What was your world, and as a marketing slash consumer expert that you are, what did those two do wrong in your view?
Yeah, great question. Look, let's, as you say, put the Labor win to the side for a minute because I think there's a strong argument that was it a Labor win or was it an LNP loss? Um, there is that. Look, I think what we are seeing right now, particularly with the LNP, and as someone who has consulted to the LNP at all levels of government, I can tell you that what we are witnessing right now is a leadership vacuum and a leadership void that became very apparent to the electorate. Um, I don't have anything against Peter Dutton, but I think what he demonstrated was just a lack of policy, a lack of. There was nothing inspiring about this election. I don't know about you, but I stood at that cardboard ballot box, staring at the white and green papers. And I don't think I've ever felt more uninspired during a campaign as I did during this one.
Mhm.
So I
I
think there was.
I'll be honest, and I don't normally put my opinions on exchanges out there, but the way I've summed it up in basically one little line for Peter Dutton, he was unelectable
He was
because of exactly
unelected.
what you said.
Yeah, there was no strong policy. There was no, and I'll say that for both sides, by the way. I mean, they were almost indistinguishable. There's just nothing inspiring. I think now more than ever, People want to be inspired by someone. They want someone who they may not always agree with, but who hangs their hat on something. I just don't think that either of these parties right now stand for anything. And, your question about the Greens is really interesting. If you look at all of the social, economic, and trends that are happening with consumer sentiment, the Greens should be killing it. And they've never been more in the wilderness, pun intended. And I know this episode wasn't designed to be a big political
No,
analysis.
this is great. This is all on the whole concept, right? Because I agree with you. Like what you're saying is political parties are like institutions. They are a brand and they have an audience and a capture rate. So go for it.
Absolutely. And I think it does come down to brand trust. I think that if we look back in the elections and leaders of the past, I never thought we'd get to a position where Kevin '07 looked so amazing and shiny and compelling and followable. There was nothing followable, there was nothing inspiring, and there was nothing shareable about their policies. So I think, yeah, big lessons around brand trust for any organization, really.
So just coming back also to the question I asked before about attention, right? And you talked about the engagement and leadership, etc. The social leadership engagement. I mean, the Greens again. I want to get onto them because they very much have the social attention and the social, brand needle through the roof. How is that therefore not translating? Why didn't that translate?
Again, I think there's a leadership vacuum there as well. I think there's two things at play here. Yes, policy is important, but leadership is the other piece of the puzzle. That I think if you get those two components right, that's where you get some real traction with the electorate. And I don't feel that the Greens have got that formula right, and they should. I think people and this is anecdotal obviously, but from what I heard out in the electorate is that people wanted to follow the Greens. They just couldn't bring themselves to because there was just those critical ingredients were missing.
So let's go back to the one we put onto the site, and that's the Labor Party. They spent a bit of a Trumpian period of doing this, doing what you and I are doing right now, which is doing a high level of podcasting. They certainly brought New World Media into the tent rather than outside the tent, bringing them on the bus. Was that part of what made their movement so compelling, that the brand was there, the message was there, and therefore, although as you said, maybe yes or no, you can agree with it or not, and I understand your point, which is that Albanese is not exactly the most inspirational leader, but putting that all together led to what we have.
Yeah, I think they did a lot of that. They ticked a lot of those boxes, and I think they were if you stand them up against the LNP, they were much more clearly much more cohesive and much more consultative. It felt a little bit more like us rather than I. It felt more like we, and that's the kind of I think that's the feeling that that does resonate with people. And I do think that again, the big factor was that Peter Dutton was just not inspiring. And there was just, I mean, if you ask even staunch LNP people, what were the three big, LNP promises in this election, they'd probably struggle to answer. So I
Well,
think
the
that,
electorate definitely would, wouldn't they? I mean,
yeah, the electorate
you
would.
and I, you and I wouldn't be able to say this is the three things that the LNP stood for.
Yeah, yeah, and it was not. I mean, I even watched some of the debates, and they were just excruciating. But I definitely think that even though it
That's an
wasn't
understatement.
right? Uh, Even if and I think the Labor Party would agree, and they're in their postmortem are probably looking at all of the things that they didn't do very well. They're probably, I think, probably a little bit surprised at just how compelling their win was, and no doubt in their postmortem they'll be looking at some of the things that they didn't do well either. But I think the thing that they did have over the LNP was just that engagement factor, a bit more grassroots, but also, did really well on the digital and social aspect of things. So they just, I think, felt a bit more modern and probably captured more of the younger market.
Yeah. So that then brings us to the next part of the conversation is we talk about the Gen Z and the millennials. They're the ones that decided the election. They are clearly also now the ones that are deciding the way that we consume, the way that thought leaders think, the way that we tap into that structure going forward. You are all over this, and I know you just basically put out a huge piece of content around, the changes of the iPhone, for example, over the last 2 decades, and it has been 2 decades since it's been out. How have you seen, particularly later millennials and Gen Zers now changing the people that you have to talk to, brand experts, executives, etc., around the future of what that consumer is, what they'll consume, and what other ethical or other components they now bring into their purchasing scenario?
Yeah, great. And look, the dissecting the trends around this is really, really fascinating. And this shift has really just happened in the last few years. For the first time in history, millennials now make up the largest proportion of the population in Australia. They've now overtaken baby boomers. So if you said to me, for most brands, and obviously every sector and business is different, but who's my customer of the future? I don't know if there's any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy tragics listening to this, fans, sorry, but 42, if I had to pinpoint it, 42-year-olds is kind of where it's at in terms of peak earning, peak spending, and peak investing. So a lot of that, major decision
That's a
life
millennial.
decisions, yeah, they're millennials, right? So, and then if you look at the younger generations coming through, they're shifting again. So we're certainly seeing across those demographics, we're seeing a real shift in priorities, motivations. Younger generations, I'm not, telling you something you don't already know, is that they're much more about experience than ownership. Um, but that said, we're looking at, there's almost this two-speed economy happening that I know you've talked about as well. And that's very much reflected in consumer behavior. We've seen that the younger generations are all about experiences, and they're much more likely to rent. And that's not just property, mind you. That's how they're purchasing. Than older generations are all about ownership. But that said, we're seeing a
Sorry, just
rise
gonna
in
interrupt you. Sorry about it. That's interesting. So you said they're not just the experience purchasing and rent purchasing. Can you take me through what you mean by that? Because that was fascinating. Like, what you're suggesting is that they're happy to do, is that buy now, pay later, or is that lay-by, or is that what is that by
all of the
renting?
yeah, all of the above. So they're much more likely to enter into a subscription model, for example, versus making big purchases. So if you can break it down to a monthly cost for them, that purchasing mindset comes much more naturally to them. So I think a lot of younger people in Australia have accepted that home ownership is out of their reach, and with that acceptance has come, well, how does that adjust my lifestyle considerations? So we're seeing a huge surge in travel. For example, I spoke to a travel agent the other day who, for the first time in her 28-year career, is quoting Kontiki tours with business class flights, and she's just never seen that before. That's one
What?
anecdotal story, but I find it really fascinating. If you look at spend on travel, and that's not just younger generations, but I certainly think they're driving it, we're much more likely to spend more and go longer than we ever have before. I think prior to COVID, we all had a travel bucket list. As I say now, I think everyone has a travel like bucket list. Like, let's go. If you look at the discretionary spend on travel, it really does defy. I just think that there's so many contradictions happening between the economy and consumer behavior. One of those is the luxury goods sector. And I'm not just talking about Louis Vuitton handbags. I'm talking about, I mean, who would have thought, Evan, that in our lifetime we would see younger generations lusting after an $80 water bottle? I mean,
Yeah.
Frank Green is the example of that just defies the all of the
So
economic data.
yeah, so but okay, I'm still trying to cop myself over the fact that somebody's gone on a business class flight to do a Kentucky tour. I mean,
Mm,
that in my generation, that's blasphemy. I would have thought the whole concept of doing Kentucky was around get the backpack, do it pretty
true.
mean and keen, and pull your bootlace straps up
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
scenario travel. I
Raw,
mean,
raw and rugged.
yeah, I mean, again, like being anecdotal, I went through Europe from Denmark to Italy over 9 weeks and spent £900 to do the whole thing. I mean, that just fascinates me. Anyway, what I want to get back to is you said several things there that the human behavior of that, for me, also in the behavioral economics world, catches my attention straight out. Is this COVID? Is it going, as you said, you've missed the travel bucket and now it's travel fuck it, do it, and away you go, in the fact that experience now has got a value that is so much more important. But it sounds like it's also what you're saying is experience and the value it's put on means that they will actually also blow capital on it. So spending that amount of money on travel to me anyway as a late millennial is something that I find hard to grapple with. But what you're saying is the new trends and the new thinking, the value of the experience is so much greater that the capital expenditures find to be put through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point that you've made. And I think, I think these were trends that were already happening. I think COVID definitely came along and turbocharged them.
YOLO?
During, sorry?
Is it YOLO? Is that part of it as well?
Yeah,
You only
definitely.
live once?
It's also social. Like, if I don't post it on Instagram, did it really happen?
Yeah.
But there's also some micro trends in Gen Z travel that I think are really interesting as well. I was actually speaking at a conference recently with the marketing manager of Kontiki, and she, in her presentation, which I had never even considered, she said a generation ago, we would make the majority of our margin on a Kontiki tour on drinks packages. They're just not selling drinks packages now because they're not drinking, because they want to look good for Instagram and they're all about health and wellness. So there's some micro trends in that I think are also really interesting, but I think it does come down to the experience. And I do think that, as I said, COVID definitely turbocharged that. During COVID, because of lockdowns and travel restrictions, and border closures, we all missed out on really significant milestones. And we don't want to harp on COVID too much, but it's important to remember that during that time, we did miss out on those milestones. And
Yeah.
towards the end of the pandemic, I got really curious about what that looked like. Had anyone actually quantified it? And the research showed that on average, every Australian, was obviously more for some, Melbourne, less for others, Queensland, but we all missed out on 4.5 milestones each on average. Now, if you extrapolate that out, that's 100 million milestones just in Australia.
Can you
Now,
explain a
how,
milestone just so for listeners, just to
like
explain
a
what you mean by
birthday, anniversary, family get together, weddings,
Yeah.
and sadly, of course, as we know, even funerals. And how we're seeing that play out is milestones mean more to us. The average spend on a wedding has never been higher.
Is that
And we
inflation or is that because of experience and want to experience?
I think inflation definitely, but I think people are just wanting to celebrate harder, clap louder, hug tighter because they were taken away from us from that for that period. And not that I think they're going to be taken away from us again, but I do think that milestones mean more to us. I mean, have you seen a gender reveal on Instagram lately? Like it's they're pretty over the top. So I think
I
that
rolled my eyes for those not watching this on YouTube.
so I do think that so I think that milestone factor is interesting, but what it speaks to in this core trend around experience and the fact that we are now wanting to celebrate, amplify, recognize milestones differently through experience, whether that's travel, whether that's the experience that I feel that I'm getting from a Frank Green water bottle that I could get exactly the same functional benefit from a $10 Kmart water bottle, but it's the experience factor that's wrapped around that people are prepared to pay for.
Yeah, because I think it's fascinating too that the next part to bring into this discussion is, the geopolitical outlook at the moment. So there is huge data coming out of Europe, the collapse of travel to the States. And the other thing that's happening with that is the rise of escapism that's coming out of the US. So the data that I've just been looking at is that the average US person has never been looking to leave for an experience, not to leave, but to leave the US for an extended period of time as they are right now. So, getting back to your point, to some of the discussions I've been doing with some clients is around right now. If you ever wanted to advertise to the US around escapism, it's now, and that trend is right up, and that is the behavior as we spoke at the start. The politics of it is obviously there's a bit of a leadership vacuum depending on what you want to look at or who you believe in the US. There's a bit of a cultural change, or at least a cultural clash, probably is the term for you, Amanda.
Yeah, yeah, and no doubt that played a role in our federal election as well. Not that the LNP want to admit that too much, but I definitely think that there's no doubt that played a role. And it definitely, if I was advising Tourism Australia right now, that is where I'd be recommending that they double down their investment. A, because the dollar, and B, because people do want to leave,
Escape.
escape, and also
Yeah,
leave, and also leave. You and I are probably looking at similar data sets.
we are.
My husband's American, and we've never felt more hesitant or resistant to traveling to America, even though he still has family there. And I think that's going to hurt them for quite some time.
Yeah. The next part of the discussion brings into what we all talk about. It's on everybody's lips, which is AI and where AI sits in this space and how the first question that I normally get in the consumer space is the hindrance and the possibility of takeover. Whereas you and I would argue, and I know that's what I'm going to ask you about, the productivity and insight gains that AI is going to give consumer business and consumer brands cannot be understated. Take me through your view, because I've heard it, but I want listeners and viewers to understand why you see AI as being one of the biggest productivity lifters for brand and for consumption that we've probably seen in a generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the brands that get this right, and even, I think there's never been more opportunity for smaller brands now to grab market share and to compete with the biggest brands in their category like never before, if they can harness the AI piece right, if they do it intelligently and ethically.
Yeah.
I think that the challenge is going to be, and I think what's going to happen with AI and what we're seeing right now with the acceleration of AI is that we're going to start to see uh, we're going to start to see two things happening. One is a lot of junk out there, a lot of, particularly in service based businesses, just a lot of crap content. So I think, again, acknowledging that, but really realizing that is a challenge, and that makes the market even noisier, makes attention even harder, but it's also an opportunity to be very clever with your content. So back to your original question about attention, it's not just going to be about attention, because anyone can do that now with AI. It's got to be, can you grab my attention in an intelligent way, connect with me, build trust? And I don't think you can do that solely with AI. So that's one thing. I think the second thing that's going to happen with AI, and this, as a mother of a 7-year-old boy, scares the hell out of me. I think we're going to see some catastrophic um, impact that's going to unfortunately have to happen before we rein it in. So I think that AI ethics is going to be the big area of contention. I think we know that the government are so far behind on this. I don't even
Hmm.
know where to start with governance. So I think it is going to be, consumers are going to, rightly or wrongly, are going to be looking to brands to self-govern AI ethics. So I think they're just kind of, firstly, get those negative things out of the way. But I do think that the and as I've always said, whether it's AI or automation or whatever the technology is, the brands that are going to win the hearts and minds of consumers in the future are going to be those that can harness the best of high tech and the best of high touch. So yes, we're in the AI era, and I'm here for it. I love AI. I love what it can do. I love how it can fast track, automate, increase productivity, enable you to do things rapidly. But when you can layer that with the human piece and the human connection and the things and the conversations that AI simply cannot, no algorithm can compete with, that's where you get the magic formula. So I think the big question for brands is going to be, yes, just because we can use AI for something doesn't mean we should. But what can we use AI for to really, drive productivity, and also not replace the human side, but actually enable us to really activate the human side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and I think that will be the driving force. I can't believe I've already got towards the end of this program, Amanda, and then we've been talking only for about half an hour. So that's fascinating. So, like I do with every single guest on this program, the big question always is, Amanda Stevens, if you're in charge for just one day, what would you do?
Oh, this is such a big question, and I don't want to sound like a megalomaniac in terms of what I choose to be in charge of. I don't have dictator syndrome. But look, if I was in charge for a day, was it? I don't know
Yep,
what I've done in a day.
yep.
Um, I,
And it can
I
be anything. It can be any, as I said, you can drill yourself down if you want to into a certain space or a certain thing or whatever it wants to be.
can we take education, because this has been on my mind a lot lately. If I was in charge of education for a day, because I'm seeing, as someone who is a mum but also has lots of friends in the education system, both as teachers and principals and head of departments. I think we are headed for, we are dumbing down a generation because we are not equipping children with the life skills that they're going to need.
Mhm.
So I think that if I was in charge of the education system, I'd do two things. I would completely overhaul the curriculum, and I really hope my principal of Ollie's school is not listening to this, because it's not not a criticism by any means, but I just think that the education system really needs to be overhauled massively to better equip our children around the skills that they're going to need, not just algebra, but resilience and life skills. And the second thing I would do is bring back a level of consequence, because I think that the lack of consequence that we are seeing in schools is playing out in our criminal youth justice system, and um, that's only going to get more catastrophic.
Exponentially worse, I think, is what you're trying to say, and I
Yeah.
agree completely.
Yes.
Amanda Stevens, thank you so much for joining Exchanges.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the chat.
Big thank you to Amanda Stevens. What insight she has. I mean, not only that, the fact that she can tell you so clearly about what went wrong and what went right in the political space, what brands are doing right and wrong, and what clearly the consumer is thinking, that what makes her such an incredible expert. So thank you to Amanda for coming on to Exchanges. Again, to you guys out there watching, thank you very much, or listening, wherever it is that you're doing this, for being on the program. We love having you tuning in every week, and we are really, really excited about where this is going. With that in mind, please don't forget, subscribe to wherever you're listening or watching to this. Add a review if you can. And if you've got time, please write in exchanges@evanlucas.com.au if you've got ideas, thoughts, guests, or anything in between that we should have on this program. But until next week, thank you again for joining Exchanges.